In just 30 days during the month of March, a massive financial asset vanished from Turkey's foreign exchange reserves. From holding $16 billion worth of U.S. government debt securities, the country's portfolio collapsed to only $1.8 billion. This near-total liquidation of dollar-denominated assets was no ordinary portfolio restructuring. It was a slash, a warning shot that opened the door to a terrifying global reality. A massive wave of capital flight from U.S. Treasury bonds is now sweeping across central banks worldwide. And Turkey is not alone. A silent but systemic migration of global capital is underway. Data from the U.S. Treasury Department confirmed that foreign investors, led by sovereign financial institutions, dumped $138.4 billion in U.S. Treasuries in March alone. Even the world's biggest financial powerhouses including Japan and China are quietly pulling their financial lifelines away from Washington's so-called ultimate safe haven. Welcome to Conflict and Power Podcast, where we explore the hidden wars of power, finance, and technology shaping the future of the world. The unipolar monetary order dominated by the US dollar for nearly a century is now facing deep structural cracks. Trust is no longer freely given. It has become expensive, fragile, and poisoned by suspicion. And when nations that once financed America's debt begin turning their backs, one terrifying question emerges. Is America's financial golden age entering an irreversible cycle of decline? Turkey's strike against Washington. To understand why Turkey decided to sell nearly 90 of its U.S. Treasury holdings in May 2026, we cannot simply analyze market fluctuations on a screen. This move was the inevitable result of years of geopolitical fractures, sanctions, and the complete collapse of strategic trust between Ankara and Washington. A decade ago, Turkey was one of the strongest pillars financing America's fiscal deficit, holding nearly $80 billion in U.S. Treasuries. At the time, Ankara was considered a loyal NATO ally, willing to place its national reserves inside Washington's financial vault. But the relationship began to fracture after the failed military coup in Turkey in 2016. Ankara accused Western intelligence networks of sheltering opposition figures linked to the coup attempt inside the United States. Strategic tensions escalated further when President Erdogan decided to purchase Russia's S-400 missile defense system. Washington saw it as betrayal. The U.S. retaliated harshly by removing Turkey from the F-35 fighter jet program and threatening economic destruction through financial pressure. At one point, an American president openly threatened on social media to destroy the Turkish lira if Ankara crossed Washington's red lines. From that moment on, Turkey's financial elite realized a brutal truth. Holding U.S. Treasury bonds and relying on the dollar meant placing their neck inside a noose controlled by the U.S. Treasury Department. Turkey quietly began reducing its exposure to American debt. By February 2025, holdings had fallen to $21 billion. Then came the geopolitical shockwave of 2026. As tensions between the United States and Iran exploded, Turkey found itself trapped inside a catastrophic economic paradox. The country imports nearly all of its energy needs. And the war-driven surge in oil prices sent crude soaring toward $120 per barrel. At the same time, the U.S. Federal Reserve maintained high interest rates, turning the dollar into a global vacuum cleaner sucking liquidity out of emerging markets. Turkey became trapped between two blades. Energy import costs exploded while the Turkish lira collapsed under the overwhelming strength of the U.S. dollar. Using a rapidly devaluing domestic currency to buy expensive dollar-priced oil directly imported inflation into Turkey's economy. Consumer inflation surged to a terrifying 32.4% year-over-year. Then political chaos struck. A controversial Turkish court ruling targeting opposition leadership triggered panic among international investors. The Istanbul stock market plunged 6.1% within 24 hours. The lira stood on the edge of systemic collapse. In that moment, Turkey's central bank understood one thing. Words and speeches would not save the currency. They needed real liquidity. Real dollars. State-owned Turkish banks launched a massive foreign exchange intervention, injecting $6 billion into the market to defend the lira. To obtain that emergency cash, Turkey's central bank was forced to liquidate its treasury holdings almost entirely. Its portfolio collapsed from 16 billion to just 1.8 billion within weeks. Turkey tightened domestic liquidity, sold foreign reserves, and even used gold holdings in emergency swap operations to secure desperately needed dollars. The crisis spread into the domestic bond market. Turkey's 10-year government bond yield exploded to a historic 35.75. A nation willingly destroyed its own domestic credit conditions just to escape dependence on America's financial system. When allies and rivals both abandon America's vault. Globally, a silent financial rebellion is unfolding. The most alarming part for Western financial elites is the participation of Asia's two largest powers, China and Japan. China has reduced its holdings of U.S. debt to just $652.3 billion, the lowest level since the 2008 financial crisis. This is not random portfolio management. After witnessing Western powers freeze hundreds of billions in foreign reserves belonging to rival nations, Beijing learned a historic lesson. Holding too many dollar-denominated assets means handing your enemy a weapon. De-Dollarization is no longer political rhetoric. It is now being implemented in real time. China is aggressively reducing treasury exposure while increasing purchases of gold and real strategic assets. But perhaps the most shocking blow comes from America's closest ally, Japan. As the largest foreign holder of U.S. debt, Japan's gradual reduction of treasury holdings signals a structural shift. For decades, Japan's ultra-low interest rates forced Japanese capital to flow overseas into U.S. debt markets. That era is ending. Inflation and energy shocks have forced the Bank of Japan to abandon its ultra-loose monetary policy. Japanese government bond yields have surged to levels not seen in decades, making domestic assets attractive again. Now massive amounts of Japanese capital are flowing back home, leaving Washington facing a dangerous liquidity vacuum. The energy trap and the crisis of debt-driven economies. At its core, this global sell-off reflects a brutal survival law of modern capitalism. The world is being squeezed between soaring energy prices and the overwhelming dominance of the US dollar. For energy-importing economies like Turkey, India, and Thailand, this becomes a financial death sentence. They must buy energy using dollars. But as their currencies weaken, every barrel of oil drains even more national wealth. Imported inflation suffocates their economies. To stop their currencies from collapsing, central banks desperately need dollars. And U.S. Treasuries, once considered safe reserve assets, are now being sold as emergency liquidity tools. Countries are not necessarily dumping treasuries because they hate America. They are selling because they are starving for liquidity. U.S. debt has transformed from a wealth-generating asset into an emergency fire extinguisher during financial disasters. But this desperate defense strategy only weakens national reserves further. The slow erosion of American financial power. Has America truly collapsed? Not yet. The U.S. financial system still possesses unmatched liquidity, depth, and global influence. The dollar remains king of global trade. But something fundamental is changing. A slow but irreversible erosion of trust is underway. For decades, the world financed America's debt, military expansion, and fiscal excess by endlessly buying U.S. treasuries. That era of unconditional loyalty is ending. As central banks diversify into gold and non-dollar assets, Washington will increasingly be forced to offer higher interest rates to attract global capital. The cost of servicing America's debt could eventually suffocate domestic spending, weaken social programs, and undermine military power itself. U.S. treasuries may remain at the center of global finance, but trust in them has become fragile, expensive, and brutally pragmatic. The arrogance of the unipolar financial order is beginning to pay its first real price. And a new multipolar financial world is slowly emerging, one where no nation can stand above the brutal laws of money and survival forever. Thank you for watching the video to the end. If you found the analysis in this video helpful in understanding the currency wars, geopolitics, and power struggles silently operating in the world, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more content. And now, I'd love to hear your perspective.